Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from around the world, especially the global south in India. My name is Sri Kumar. I'm the CEO for Indiaspora in India and the managing director for the Global East, what we call the Global East, which is the Global South. On behalf of Indiaspora, it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation marking the International Day for Family Remittances. A quick brief on Indiaspora, those who don't know us yet. We were founded in 2012. It's a not-for-profit organization headquartered in the Bay Area in the USA that brings together a global network of diaspora leaders from diverse backgrounds and professions across several countries around the world. And our mission is to inspire and position the diaspora as a force for good by strengthening connections among global Indians and deepening their engagement with India and the wider world. Every year, millions of migrants send money home to support their families, educate children, provide healthcare, build homes, and create opportunities. These remittances are much more than financial transactions. They're expressions of care, commitment, and enduring connections. India today remains the world's largest recipient of remittances, receiving over 138 billion annually. Behind this is a remarkable figure of 35 million Indians living and working across the globe who continue to maintain strong ties with their families and communities back home. And their contributions have helped improve lives, strengthen local economies, and support India's development journey. The global Indian diaspora, which is about 35 million, contributes not only to the financial capital, but also through intellectual capital, social capital, philanthropic giving, entrepreneurship, innovation, and public service. Today's discussion is an opportunity to explore how these various forms of contribution come together to create a lasting impact. We'll examine the evolving roles of remittances, understand broader diaspora engagement trends, and discuss how the collective efforts of Indians around the world are helping drive inclusive growth and development. I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to an engaging and insightful discussion. Before I hand it over to Isheeta, who will be moderating and chairing the session, I want to say that we had created a diaspora report during our annual forum in March, which you can find on our website at indiaspora.org. It's called the Indiaspora and its India and its Diaspora Partners in Progress. Isheeta will moderate and chair this session. She's a writer, artist, singer, board member at the Antara Foundation, Columbia University. I'll request her to make some opening remarks, introduce the panelists, and then continue with the session. Over to you, Isheeta. Thank you, everyone, again.
Thank you so much, Sri Kumar. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to folks all over the world. It is a delight to have you join us. With Viksit Bharat coming up in 2047, we are at an important crossroads for the diasporic community to contribute in ways that are unprecedented in philanthropy, in healthcare, in business, in tech. As the Indian diaspora earns an upwards of $30 billion with a meaningful share returning to India for investment and family support, our findings at the Indiaspora indicate a strong appetite for contribution across sectors. But what are the barriers to these contributions? How can we ease investment in India? How can we ease the obstacles and the constraints that many face across the world? How do we account for generational change in reshaping diasporic participation? How do we get the younger generation involved who may not have the same sense of Indianness that this generation has, may not connect to the same themes of culture, food, and modern culture and media icons? How do we deepen their attachment to the Indian diaspora to want to contribute and be a part of this movement with us? I have a group of very, very esteemed panelists with me this morning. I'd like to start with Geeta Kulkarni, who is a wonderful Vice President of Finance with the CIP Fund Solutions, We then have Ambassador Sunjay Sudhir, a diplomat and former ambassador to the UAE. We have PK Gulati, an entrepreneur, mentor, and angel investor. And we have Ambassador Sami from the UAE, from Fiji as well. I'm going to start our panel this morning with questions for Geeta. Geeta, good morning. How are you?
Good afternoon from Melbourne, Australia. Thanks, Isheeta.
So tell me a little bit about your perception of remittances from Australia. They are often categorized as personal transfers, but you work in structured capital solutions. At what point does a remittance stop being a family obligation and start becoming an investment vehicle that we are yet to see and that there are yet with India?
Thank you, Isheeta. And once again, good afternoon. And thank you to Indiaspora for the opportunity to join this panel, and big hello to the esteemed panelists and to the guests who joined us today. Isheeta, in answer to your question, I think remittances to India are fairly broad, right? There's individuals, a group of individuals, and today that's the focus as opposed to formal institutional investors. So I think broadly speaking, the scale of remittances into India continues to grow. I think the report suggests that there's a 10-fold leap in remittances from 2000 to now in 2024. And just speaking of Australia alone, the Indian born population now makes up 3.5% of the entire population of Australia. Now that's a significant increase. And the data published by the Australian Bureau of Statistics indicates that in 2024, the remittances out of Australia by individuals was significant, but of that, 20% alone was by the Indian diaspora, remittances into India from Indian Australians. And that accounted for about 7.3 billion Australian dollars, which loosely translates to US 5 billion or more. So, and the primary focus or purpose behind this is to support family expenses, consumption, healthcare, education. But there has been a slow but very, very sure-footed pivot to more structured investments. That's into housing. What happens to the diaspora if some of them decide to move and settle back into India at some stage in their life? Shares, ETFs, etc. So there's a much more awareness of that in the community at large. But I'd say the one that really is growing in leaps and bounds is social entrepreneurship and supporting social causes. So I think speaking personally, I am part of this group of, we are from Maharashtra, and we support and engage with a social venture that has been set up to essentially support children of farmers who have, hit hardship or there's been some tragedy in their lives. This is a social venture, and we contribute together. We have regular updates from these teams and our children who are second generation. It also gives them a strong purpose to be involved in their community. There is proper investment in actually growing the support base. There's in the education, in the science labs, in these schools. And every year we get updates on how well the children are doing, where the gaps are, how we can support better. So there is, of course, there's formal investment vehicles, but there's also a growing trend to invest in human capital, invest in our future, into the Indian youth. So definitely there's that growing social entrepreneurship support here. And in the Indiaspora report as well, it talks about the significant and structured capital support that IIT alumni provide to their IITs back home, and there's a proper donor base that supports it. So I think Australia is not quite there, but there's definitely ambition by this community here to sort of be inspired by our diaspora partners or colleagues or family back in the US.
two questions for you. You bring up the issue of philanthropy and giving back to children of farmers in Maharashtra. How, as Sri Kumar mentioned, I'm on the board of the Antara Foundation, which does work with maternal child health in Madhya Pradesh. I've worked in management consulting and healthcare for many years, on both in the US and in India. How would you say that we can inspire more of the diaspora to want to connect to development causes in India in public health, education, and climate? We're now finding that there is a deeper link in climate and public health for women bearing children, for instance. Climatic conditions that are severe make maternal child health even more high risk. How do we connect our diaspora community more deeply to the great need for development in India?
It's, I think you say, what you said is correct, is that there is a strong link, climate change doesn't look at borders. It impacts all of us. I think the news media does a good job in linking that, changes of climate and the way it impacts grassroots farmers and women in general. Yes, it's more pronounced in developing world in India, but it's also felt here. So definitely that awareness is growing. We can do more in that space. And there's this, I think everything boils down to purpose, how do we link our purpose into how we give back? I always remind ourselves and others, about the Ashtalakshmi divine philosophy, that true wealth, when shared and when it flows, is what creates abundance for all. So it's really, really going back to first principles and saying, we are here for a higher purpose. And also it's an opportunity, and we've really seen that, is where we involve our children in that purpose and they feel like they're giving back and feel empowered and, really lucky for the opportunities they have, but also that there is a role for them to play in improving conditions, not just for themselves, but, people who depend on them. They might be, they don't see them in their day-to-day lives, but they can connect with them regardless.
A lot of the giving, Geeta, as you know, in India has been largely focused on family philanthropy, individual families making large contributions. So therefore, diasporic giving becomes even more critical than ever. How would you say that identity in Australia, from the perspective of being Indian Australian, is something that's being transmitted to the new generation in their desire and opportunity to want to engage with India?
A lot of that has to do with the community leadership, I believe. We must assimilate, but at the same time, we can be, we're citizens of the world. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's done through the traditional channels, of course, keeping in touch with family, really having that presence in all the major events and festivals. But it goes beyond food and dance, because I think we all participate in that. But really, I think the biggest, as a mother of children born here, I think the biggest gift that we have in our tradition that's passed down is our storytelling. And I, being a finance person, sort of put finance into it. That's hence the Lakshmi philosophy. So there's a lot we can add. I think we have to just really recognize our strengths, speak about that. And while we assimilate with the Australian way of life, we've also got a strong foot in the Indian camp. And the two really are not that diagonally opposite. They're very, very harmonious. So it's just finding that you're not choosing. It's one and the same thing in many ways.
That's beautifully said. That's very beautifully said. I grew up in the US and also spent time growing up in Turkey, Japan, and Indonesia due to the nature of my father's work. And I think that's exactly right. It's never about choosing one culture over another, but finding the similarities and anchoring our Indianness to wherever we are. Shifting back to finance for a second, there's been a growing interest in diaspora bonds and blended finance instruments. Are these realistic at scale, or are they still largely aspirational for the average NRI?
I would say largely aspirational for the wider diaspora. And I say that because the ones that I'm aware of, the minimum ticket price is US 50,000, sometimes 100,000 or more. And that is a lot to invest for a working family away from their home country. It's a risk. Sometimes they lack liquidity because of a later maturity date. And I think the biggest risk, and depends on the type of instrument that's available, is the exchange rate. And if you had to compare the Indian rupee versus the Australian dollar in the last 12 months, the rupee has depreciated 20%. So you have to have a rate of return if the investment is in INR,
Yes.
It has to be hedged, or if not, then the rate of return has to far exceed the risk in the exchange rate depreciation. So the financial instruments and bonds must have really a compelling reason when compared to the locally available options. In Australia, especially, we have the retirement funds called superannuation funds. They're low tax. They have an average of 8 to 10% returns over the annualized returns over the last 10 years. And they are structured and they're quite in a manner that's quite easy to manage and flexible. So to then choose an option overseas in India, that is an investment versus what we have available here. It has to be compelling. And I haven't seen that yet, but that does mean that there's an opportunity to structure such investments for the larger diaspora to really look at. Because if given a choice, I think people would invest in something they're familiar with and are aware of.
We talk about $138 billion flowing into India annually. How much of that is actually working capital versus consumption spending? From a finance lens, what would it take to shift that ratio?
Large part of it, I think the substantial majority is geared towards supporting family, education, healthcare, as opposed to the alternative that you mentioned. And I think it still has a part to play because it helps improve living standards. And I think it's accessible to family. It's also easy, bank account to bank account transfers, as opposed to something more formal, which might involve a lot of paperwork. So the alternative that you've asked about is quite sophisticated, like for institutions, investors, or small businesses, working capital requirements, etc. And a lot of those are also linked to policy setting. And what is, the options and the pros and cons of it. I think there's still needs to be more information out there and options available, but they don't, from the numbers I've seen, it's only 25% of the total remittances or less. And from a finance lens, just coming to that, I think the diaspora is also at different levels of financial literacy. So I think that has to be a big part of if there's an education campaign there, if we're really serious about shifting the focus and those numbers into more formal investing in working capital. And again, I've talked about the exchange rate and the depreciation and the risk that sometimes poses. So from a finance lens, I think exchange rate and hedging options and also the financial literacy of the diaspora are two main points.
Correct. Geeta, thank you very much so far for our conversation. And I'd love you to jump in as I move on to some of the other participants. And I'd like to move on to Ambassador Sudhir.
Thank you, Isheeta.
How are you doing?
Being recorded.
Wonderful. There's an echo. Is that just on my end? I don't know. You have seen the relationship between India and the UAE transform dramatically. The UAE accounts for a huge chunk of remittances. How much of that economic corridor is a result of deliberate diplomacy versus organic diasporic momentum, would you say?
Thanks, Isheeta. So you're talking about deliberate diplomacy versus organic diaspora momentum.
Yes.
I think to answer your question very honestly, grounded in the evidence is roughly this. The diaspora built the corridor. Diplomacy is now paving it. The most interesting story is how the two have begun to compound each other, actually. Let's be clear. Diaspora came first and built the corridor during a diplomatic vacuum. India-UAE diplomatic relations formally date to 1972 because the UAE itself was formed in 1971. But high-level engagement was episodic at best. Prime Minister Modi's visit in 2015 actually broke a 34-year gap in prime minister level visits. Through those 3+ decades, in fact, several decades before that, millions of Indians settled in the UAE, built businesses, remitted billions, and made themselves indispensable to the UAE economy.
Mhm.
But by the time India's political leadership arrived in Abu Dhabi airport with the ambition and agenda, the Indian community had already made India a very indispensable economic partner for the UAE. Diaspora did not wait for a CIPA. They actually created the conditions that made CIPA possible. The CIPA itself is very instructive, I would say. The 880-page document was signed in just 88 days. And that's a timeline that would have been unthinkable between the countries without deep prior trust. And how was this trust built? The trust was not built in the foreign ministries, I would say, very frankly. It was built in Dubai's construction sites, Indian-owned enterprises in Dubai, and Indian participation in the boardrooms in the UAE, and several Indian entrepreneurs who landed in Dubai, even before assured electricity or water supply was there. Diplomacy just arrived to harvest a crop the diaspora had planted over several decades. On the remittance part, the remittance numbers make it very concrete. The UAE contributes about 19.2% of all remittances to India, which is about 26 billion annually. That flow actually predates every bilateral MOU, every joint commission, state visit, etc. It was organic. The workers and professionals sending money back home, responding not to policy design, but to family needs and wage differentials. And then later on, it also got transformed into a lot of FDI, angel investors, like PKs on the screen, investing in Indian startups. So the story is actually changing. Diplomacy of the last decade has moved from celebratory to structural. So for instance, to give you some very concrete examples, the UPI ANI link, which was started in 2023, and the RuPay J1 card stack in 2024, which made UAE the first GCC country to receive India's domestic card technology. Actually, the only country in the world. These were not ceremonial gestures. They are something very concrete, and they will reduce remittance costs, accelerate transfer times, and bring informal flows into the formal channel. The local currency trade settlement mechanism, for instance, allowing trade settlement in rupees and dirhams, similarly address something that Indian and Emirati businesses had already been doing around the edges. Diplomacy just started formalizing what the market had improvised.
Sure.
Says the same story. CIPA had set a goal of moving from 60 billion to 100 billion in 5 years. It crossed the 100 billion mark well ahead of schedule. The new target is now 200 billion by 2032. And so the diaspora actually created the demand. The framework is now expanding the ceiling. In conclusion, my view is that historically, India-UAE corridor is about 70% organic diaspora momentum and 30%, I would say, deliberate diplomacy. But the ratio is shifting very fast, not because the diaspora's role is diminishing, but because Indian diplomacy has finally learned to treat diaspora as a lead instrument rather than as an afterthought. The best diplomatic achievements in this corridor, the CIPA, as I mentioned, the UPI ANI, the RuPay J1, all share one common feature, that they started from what people already needed and gave it an institutional form. And that is, I think, the right template for diaspora-aware diplomacy.
That's incredibly insightful, Ambassador Sudhir. And what you describe is a confluence of the government coming in with ongoing entrepreneurial private sector activity in a quasi-public-private partnership of sorts. But do diasporic communities actually feel a part of these frameworks in their daily lives? Where is the gap, would you say, between diplomatic architecture and ground level impact?
So a diaspora community is actually feeling a part of the frameworks in their daily lives and gaps. Well, based on my stay in the UAE as ambassador for 4 years between 2021 and 2025, I can confidently say that much of the diplomatic architecture is actually based on the felt needs of Indian diaspora. So Prime Minister gave us one mantra, which we always kept in the back of our minds, that how do we enhance the ease of living of our diaspora?
Yes.
I see a clear shrinking of the gap between diplomatic architecture and ground level impact. Of course, I mean, having said that, there is much more that can be done. There are things can be done which can be done better, but certainly I see shrinking of this gap. Diplomacy that started at the top has steadily percolated down to the lives of ordinary Indians in the UAE, which now, as you know, is about 4.5 million. And the velocity of that percolation has actually accelerated very sharply, particularly since 2015. Start with the most tangible daily life change, money, for instance. The UPI ANI integration, as I mentioned, and the RuPay, where the J1 network, both were diplomatic deliverables of PM Modi's visit in 2024. But then these are no longer conference room agreement. You know, they impact people's lives. Today, UPI is live across about 200,000 plus points of sale terminals and at about 60,000 merchants.
I think they say, I'm just adding one point, there are more UPI transactions than Visa card transactions in the world. So,
well, yes. Given the numbers, definitely there is no doubt about that, and that was the whole idea behind the introduction of UPI. In fact, what India has done in the digital public infrastructure is something which is very remarkable. In fact, even when if you look at Prime Minister's ongoing visit to France, the bilateral bit yesterday, UPI was something which was which was highlighted so much. I mean, that's something which the world can pick up lessons from us. So also, you know, on the residency and the security of tenure, the transformation has been profound. The UAE Golden Visa program, for instance, expanded through bilateral understanding and mutual goodwill, issued about 158,000 visas in 2024, and they crossed the 2 lakh mark in 2025, with a significant share going to Indian professionals in technology, healthcare, education, and all the fields. So this is, you know, I don't say that the Golden Visa was instituted for India, but I say that the value that Indians bring to the UAE ecosystem was definitely an enabler for such an idea to catch roots. And today is for the first time in the history of Gulf migration that Indian professionals have access to a 10-year renewable residency with self-sponsorship, family inclusion, etc., etc. And I think that's a good role model for other countries, particularly in the Gulf, to follow. I mean, again, in terms of impact, labor law reforms now allows job changes without a no objection certificate. A provision removed one of the most enduring anxieties of our working class in the Gulf. Family sponsorship thresholds have been lowered now, and recently the UAE's AI-powered Salama visa system has cut renewable processing from hours to just seconds. So, I mean, these are how things are impacting, to say, the bottom of the pyramid. And also, on professional recognition, CIPA is changing the ceiling and not just the floor. The agreement actually includes mutual recognition of qualifications in a lot of fields: medicine, engineering, architecture, etc., etc. So Indian doctors, engineers, chartered accountants can now navigate a structured equivalence pathway much better. I would say that the macro confirms the micro.
You are at the branch or you are at the...
For our $1 billion, our trade to cross $100 billion ahead of the 5-year CIPA target, I think is the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. But what the India-UAE relationship demonstrates is that when diplomacy is diaspora aware from inception, when it builds payment infrastructures, residency security, qualification, recognition, etc., the ground level does feel it. Having said that, of course, there's so much more that can be done because it's always a moving target. And I'm very confident that the government is very well aware of this.
How would you say, from spending time in the UAE, I have certainly experienced during visits and cultural performances that I've done, that there is a deep cultural pride that there is in the UAE towards India and a connectedness. How can we translate that cultural pride into a deeper sense of economic engagement? How do we deepen that tie?
Isheeta, so when we talk about diaspora has been changing. The nature of diaspora globally has been transforming. So based on, say, 3 decades of my representing India,
Right.
has taught me one thing with certainty, that cultural pride is necessary, but never sufficient. Every diaspora community I've ever interacted with has pride in abundance. But what converted the pride into capital flows was a different set of conditions entirely. And they can be precisely listed. Let me share just 4 such observations.
Sure.
I will also, of course, like to mention the challenges ahead of us, where both the Indian diaspora and the Indian government have a lot to work on together. The first condition is narrative confidence in the homeland. Diaspora communities do not invest purely on sentiment. Of course, to send back money to support families is a different matter. That is some part of an inelastic part of the remittance. But other than that, it's not purely on sentiment. They invest in business trajectories. In the 90s and 2000s, NRI flow was very hesitant, I would say.
Yes.
India's story was still one of deferred potential.
Yes.
But after 2014, and especially post-COVID, that calculus changed, and India became a compelling investment thesis. The world's fastest major growing economy, digital infrastructure, which we just mentioned, and this infrastructure has DPI, as they say, has leapfrogged the West, and a policy environment actively courting diaspora capital. Again, having said that, much more to be done. But certainly there have been a lot of good initiatives, and the result is measurable. FDI equity flows in the first 9 months of the financial year 2026, the last financial year, grew about 22% year on year to about 48 billion, with roughly 1/3 attributed to Indian community routing through Singapore, UAE, US, UK, Mauritius. The second condition is transactional ease. And this is where governments can either earn or lose the community. I've sat across the table from successful NRI entrepreneurs who wanted to invest in India, but had been burned by regulatory ambiguity, land title disputes, FEMA compliance complexity, or simply the exhaustion of doing business across time zones through systems which are not really catered for them. Every such experience actually travels back through the diaspora networks at lightning speed. We have seen simplification of FDI norms. Company registration now takes much shorter. 100% FDI under the automatic route is allowed in most sectors. Invest India has a dedicated diaspora desk. Of course, things can be better. There's no doubt about that. But then all these things have visibly moved the needle. India has about 130 plus unicorns, many seeded by diaspora angel investors. The structural improvements are real, and the community knows that much more can be done. And I'm sure PK will share more details about this. The third condition I feel is and I think this is the one most underestimated, is visibility of impact for philanthropy. Diaspora philanthropy to India has historically lacked an enabling architecture. What is changing is, say, organizations like Indiaspora building credible options. India Giving Day, for instance, grew from 1.3 million in 2023 to about 8.8 million. So, these are very concrete things. 7x growth in 2 years is not an accident. It is what happens when donors can see exactly what's happening to their contributions. A class hospital ward, a girl going to school. The fourth condition, I would say, is peer effect, as it happens anywhere in life within the community. So when a respected member of diaspora, a successful entrepreneur, a community patriarch makes a visible investment in philanthropy, it encourages others to follow. But as I said, there are lots of challenges and risks ahead. And Geeta mentioned some of them. You also mentioned a few. One is I can think of is the generational cliff is the most underappreciated risk. The first generation, of course, invests in India because India is visceral for them. It's the village they left, the parent they still call, the accent. Probably they never lost. The second generation has India as heritage, not as memory. The third generation has India as identity, performance, yoga, Diwali, etc., etc. So as the first generation ages out, the pipeline of emotionally motivated capital also thins out. So we have to be conscious about that.
Right.
Second, I would say second challenge is this FCRA.
Yes.
I think this FCRA is philanthropy's most persistent structural obstacle. The 2020, yeah,
absolutely.
So 2020 FCRA amendments, banning sub-granting between registered organizations, capping administrative spending, centralizing fund flow through a single Indian bank, were intended to prevent actually misuse, but have instead created a compliance environment that deters many serious diaspora donors.
Yes,
The 2024 amendment rules brought some relief, but the underlying architecture still remains one of suspicion rather than facilitation.
Yes.
On FDI, also, the FEMA's complexity is still some kind of a silent tax on diaspora capital.
Yes.
I mean, the intention of the government is, of course, always to make it facilitatory, but still, you never know what's going to hit you. Where are all the fine prints are. So NRI and OCI investment is technically treated at par with resident investment.
Yes.
In sectors. In practice, the compliance architecture, like repatriation rules, account type distinction between NRE, NRO, FCNR instruments, sector-specific restrictions, and the ever-evolving RBI circulars. So you just keep track of all those things. Creates a lot of friction that sophisticated investors can navigate, but that deters, the larger diaspora middle. Also, the OCI ceiling, which sends very wrong, I think, political signaling. It's time that India considers permitting dual citizenship. Of course, with checks and balances. For a community that has produced heads of government, senators, ministers, and CEOs, very well recognized, being told that they are welcome as investors, but not as citizens, creates some kind of a subtle but real sense of conditionality.
Right.
And finally, India's own narrative consistency matters. Diaspora capital is patient, but not unconditional. When policy signals are mixed on taxation of NRI income, for instance, on the period of stay, in India and overseas, on retrospective regulatory changes, on treatment of minority investors in the high-profile cases. The community does notice. Trust, once lost across diaspora,
Yes.
is something which is very slow to then rebuild. So the challenges
Yes.
are real, but none of them is a structural impossibility.
Correct.
They are exception, policy choices, which means that they can always be worked out in the future.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sudhir. This has been such an engaging set of questions and a discussion. Looking forward to hearing from you more as the conversation proceeds, and really wonderful insights that you shared. I would like to ask PK to join the table in terms of our discussion. It's wonderful to connect and to have you as a part of this esteemed group of panels. So I think Ambassador Sudhir raised some really important points. I know that I have certainly personally experienced as a management consultant. I set up the Indian version of Sesame Street, the children's edutainment show in India in the late 2000s. And in terms of the point that he made as far as regulatory compliance, we were navigating a grant with the USAID, needed clearances from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, the Ministry of Finance, and that was the initial phase of our development phase funding, which if we didn't get, the project really wasn't greenlit. In terms of getting government clearances and government sort of buy-in as to the importance of preschool education in the Indian context, that was a challenge. What would you say in your experience as a founder, as someone who backs founders, as an angel investor, how do we mitigate these challenges for startups in the private sector? You're muted.
Yes. Sorry about that. I think they're trying to control who speaks. Thank you very much for having me, Isheeta. Listen, if I may start with something like, the diasporas are different. Their need to invest is different. And that reflects on the question that you put up. See, sending money back for family as a remittance or sending it back because you're emotionally connected is different from investment. And when we put our hats on as investors going into India, for example, or investing in India-related investments, it is more, ruled by how the returns would look like.
Sure.
What would be the ease of doing it? And emotion goes as far as Sanjay was saying. People have this, fondness, depending on how close you've been in terms of generation 1, 2, or 3 with your country of origin. But when it comes down to making investments, the diaspora tends to have options. Our friend Geeta from Australia said, finally, you have to look at what the returns are. When currency is depreciating, especially the way Indian currency has, it has put a lot of question marks on that. Ease of doing business has also done that. So if you look at from that aspect, there has been a very, kind of, let's say, changing scenario that I think could have been better handled, or if we deliberately work towards getting more people to come in and not have stories like you said, in terms of getting permissions and having ease and clarity of how
Sure.
things would make a difference. But also the truth is that the emotional attachment of Indian diaspora to India has been one of the biggest reasons why startup investments ended up going into India in the first place.
Right.
If historically we look at it, India was not somewhere where people would think of investing. In fact, the early diaspora would probably not find any reason to invest in except probably building a house back home for emotional reasons. If you look at the early startups, the people who came in and invested in them and took risk on them were expat investors. The VC funds also had expats who were coming in and selling the India story very early. And that's how we saw what we saw. I put the Indian diaspora remittances in 3 different buckets. You know, they are remittances which people send emotionally for family welfare, for supporting the family or investing in that. The second is, of course, what is called FDI, which is basically investing in, you know, projects, companies, factories, manufacturing, startups. The third thing is FPI, which is more public market investing, where money comes in, invests in public markets and does that, which is the so-called India public story, IPO story that people are talking about. These are
Right.
3 big buckets. And then the fourth one is philanthropy, which people spoke about. But philanthropy, in my opinion, is a fag-end investment, in the sense when people become successful, start thinking about what they want to do for the world. And when they think about that, that has a bit of emotion and a lot of what impact that would make. Now, that emotion brings them to India, but a lot of it depends on how or what they feel about their investment and the impact that creates. When we come down to remittances, the numbers have been talked about for the UAE being one of the largest corridors and stuff. It is true. But remember, most of the people from the diaspora in the UAE are actually Indian citizens and
Right.
remain citizens. That is one big thing which is different from probably diaspora, say in the US and other places.
Sure.
Now, this corridor is important, but the truth is, while the numbers seem to be increasing, the pace of acceleration seems to be decreasing. So the number over time are tapering out. And that has more to do with the fact that there are 2 things happening. First is the number of Indians going abroad is reducing because of pressures of immigration and the pressures of job controls in various countries. So there are typical places where the numbers are growing, are slowing down, be it the H-1B issue in the US or be it other countries. All those things are reducing the size of the cohort.
Yes.
And the second thing, which briefly was mentioned by Sunjay, was the age, which he talked about in Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. There's a word for it. We call it the aging of the cohort, the cohort of remitters. So as time goes by, the scientific truth is that people stop sending money, it starts getting lesser and lesser depending on their age away from the country, means the aging of the cohort. When you go in first, you almost send almost all the money that you make, you send back home, and it starts slowing down because of 2 reasons. First is people either develop a life in the new country, so they start investing in that new life, buying a house in their country of living. And what that does is that reduces it. The second thing happens is they start doing families. So family requirement actually make their own individual family or nuclear family becoming more important investing. So we need to continue building new cohorts of people going abroad. And I think in the terms of startups, sorry to be a bit long on this, the cohort which is increasing, I see, are the new ambassadors. We've used this word multiple times today. The new ambassadors, which are the Indian companies going abroad and looking at them as markets. This is the startups which grew up in India. So if you look at UAE is a very, very fertile market for these startups to come in here. I could name quite a few, but I don't know if it's fair to name them. But big ones, public ones, are based here and use UAE as a very strong base. These were invested in by people from the diaspora initially, but then formal money came in. Some of them went public substantially. And now we see this new cohort of youngsters coming abroad. And with this comes across a whole management cadre. With this comes across a whole line of storytelling. With this comes like a whole line of creation of prosperity and wealth. In my opinion, this is what is going to be the new engine for India.
Where do you see the most high potential intersection between diasporic capital and India's current development needs, sectors that aren't getting enough attention? Of course, I come from a public health philanthropy perspective, and that's certainly a personal, deep engagement point and passion of mine. But how do you see the benefits of for entrepreneurs and angel investors to get more involved in social impact investing and this segment for India?
You know, investing of any kind has to be sustainable in the sense that
Right.
at the end of the day, donation or impact investing can start it, but finally the things have to become sustainable. India presents a great opportunity in terms of sustainability or possible sustainable projects in this kind, because we have large problems. And if we are so able to solve them at that large number, we have a possibility of making global impact. And that is a very interesting part of looking at it from that point of view. So I see entrepreneurs looking at larger problems to solve. I believe regulatory overhang and ease of doing business are two things which could make this far, far more accelerated. I hear stories from entrepreneurs which come back and talk about wanting to do things and not being able to do things, from everything from FCRA to
Yes.
regulation to not allowing, to vested interests and embedded incumbents not allowing things to change.
Yes.
So those kind of impacts are the issues which actually limit us or limit what diaspora support could do for India in terms of really, really moving the needle. You know,
Yes.
from wellness to health to education, all of the areas. I personally had a personal experience of trying to set up an educational institution in India, and the amount of regulatory trouble, which we went through on a personal basis, to the extent that I had to resign from the board because of the amount of hassle being core. So if you look at it from that aspect, over time, it tests patience.
Right.
And I think we should work on that, and we should work far more with far more speed and urgency for that, because there are big problems which can only be solved when we build these kind of infrastructure.
Yes.
So looking at that, I think education is one big area to do that, and especially with changing of education, where people are now questioning if degrees matter or not. With AI and things coming in, what can we do about it? There are great ideas being done that, and a lot of them are being done by diaspora entrepreneurs globally. So there are things which we could do. We should work towards that. I think diaspora has the goodwill to bring those ideas into the country, provided the country is ready for it.
Yes, yes, very well said. Very, very well said. PK, this has been terrific, and we're just a little trying to extend our conversation a little bit. I hope people can stay till 11:15, just because there's been such an engaged conversation, and we'd love to hear from PK, Ambassador Sudhir, and Geeta a little further into the conversation again as well. I want to move to Ambassador Sami. If he could just share a little bit of insight on the everyday life in Fiji as it pertains to remittances. What would you say that current purview is like cross-sectorally in Fiji, across socioeconomic groups? I think you're on mute.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel. I hope I can justify my presence here. Your question about remittances to Fiji, of course, the way I see remittances to Fiji is like a lifeline for the people of Fiji. Remittances actually account for almost 25% of our national budget, which is about 1 billion Fijian dollars, equivalent to about 433 433 million US dollars. Largely, we have Fijian diaspora all over the world, but mainly in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and USA. Some might be even in UK. Australia accounts for about 48% of our remittances. New Zealand, about 24% of the remittances, and the balance of 32% mostly comes from Canada and other countries. So remittances is very critical for Fiji in that respect, largely because Fiji's governance structure and Fiji's situation is unique in many respects. Fiji, like India, was a British colony. And of course, the structures, governance structures left behind is more inbuilt and which affects, the economy in many respects. If you look at the land legislations, the British had given ownership to the indigenous people before the Girmitias arrived in Fiji. Therefore, the ownership of land belongs to the natives. The Girmitias came much later, and when they did come, they became a tenant community. Of course, that structure cannot be disturbed. Land is very like a birthright to the natives, like the tribal communities everywhere else in the world. And for the Indian community, being a tenant community could be only for a while or buying time. And the Girmitias focused on education. And as a result, most of our schools are owned by NGOs. 98% of the schools are owned by NGOs and privately owned, and government owns only 2% of the schools. Hence, you find that there's a lot of younger people coming out as educated and not wanting to remain on agriculture in agricultural sector or in the rural base, and are moving away for jobs. Post-pandemic, there was a huge demand for employment in Australia, New Zealand, USA, Canada, and a lot of our young people have moved out. This is not only talking about Indo-Fijians, but also our educated, the Itoke or the native community. Hence, the amount of remittances coming back from the diaspora outside of Fiji plays a very significant role in the economy of the country, in the livelihood of the people. The ordinary people are, like I said, about 12% of our household income is through remittances. And also, addition to that, diasporas send money, remittances back home for marriages, for weddings, for funerals, like perhaps everywhere else. But the important thing is the attachment of the people of Fiji, irrespective of what ethnic group one may belong. There is a national pride among the Indo-Fijians who were born in Fiji, and even the natives who were the first inhabitants of Fiji. So you can see the cultural tie with Fiji, very strong cultural ties, emotional ties, are bringing back our diaspora to Fiji quite often. We have the Girmit days once a year, which brings the diaspora from all over the world to Fiji. And not only individuals in sporting fields, but also the families. They come in for their annual pujas, which is, to the temples.
Yes.
They come back to reunite with other family members who are still in Fiji. So it's a huge a gathering, a sort of an annual ritual where everybody looks forward to coming back to Fiji for these Gurmit celebrations or religious excursions. So remittance and the investments that the diaspora makes to Fiji is very significant. And to add to that, the government policies of engaging with bilateral engagements with Australia and New Zealand for employment due to the effects of climate change on our economy and because of post-pandemic shortage of skilled labor and lack of sufficient investments. So the government has taken the initiative of engaging with neighboring countries like Australia and New Zealand to get more employment for the youth workers in Australia and New Zealand. So remittances are also coming through employment as well. Coupled with that, we have our peacekeeping force, which with the UN, our defense, as well as our police force, who are attached to the UN forces outside of Fiji or around the world. So remittances also come from those sectors as well. So you can clearly see it is not the diaspora who have migrated. There is about close to 250,000 Fijian diaspora outside of Fiji. But we also have our peacekeepers, and we also have our citizens who have gone out to Australia and New Zealand to work. So all this has created a kind of a you could say a character. It is playing a very key role in the economy of Fiji, in the support structures, social support structures for the communities who are still in Fiji. Despite all the challenges that they are faced, remittances play a very key role. And without the remittances, like I said earlier, 25% of our budget, national budget, comes from remittances. Fiji being a very small country with only less than 1 million people, located in the South Pacific, surrounded by some 14 Pacific Island countries, Australia and New Zealand being our closest neighbors. We have some unique challenges, but we also have some unique strengths, like I said, our national pride, our connection to Fiji, our Gurmit connection to Fiji, the historical connection with Fiji, when the first Gurmitis arrived in Fiji. Also, the family bonds and the birthplace. I think the important thing to understand would be the uniqueness in the diaspora in Fiji is that whilst the natives, for them, the land is a very strong attachment to them, emotionally and hereditary wise. For the Indians, it's a place where your umbilical cord was buried. Sort of you were born there, and that drives the people all over the world to visit Fiji, and still being attached to Fiji, although they may be out of Fiji in various countries. So I see the diaspora continuing to play a very strong role in years to come. And it is important for the country to recognize, and I think the government does recognize the contribution of the diaspora. They are encouraging the diaspora members to come and invest in Fiji. They are free to come and invest in Fiji. They're free to come and claim the citizenship, even those who want it. Fiji allows dual citizenship as well. The government is also proactive in encouraging diasporas to come back to invest as well. So all this, I think, is important to note that whilst it is not by choice that a lot of them would have migrated, the conditions, the circumstances have also created situations where educated young people have migrated for for better jobs or for better life. But however, their attachment, their connection, their contribution to the country is continuing and plays a very major role in the development of the country and the welfare of the people of Fiji.
High Commissioner, you raise a very interesting point of a segment of the population that has moved to Fiji for a better job, for a better life, and perhaps have been forced to migrate. How would you say that has, in some ways, deteriorated or changed their level of attachment to India because of the forced migration? Does that change their self-perception in the diaspora in Fiji and their desire to want to engage economically for India's growth and ultimately also to give back from a philanthropy perspective? Has that mindset developed in Fiji?
Well, Fiji and India, like I said earlier, I mean, there is a very strong historical ties with India because of the migration, because of the indenture system and the dignitaries taken from India to Fiji. Whilst our ancestors would have come from India, and India is recognized as by the dignitaries as the motherland, although your birthplace is Fiji. I think because of the distance, maybe over the years, there hasn't been so much of close ties until recent years when more proactive engagements have taken place between India and Fiji.
Right.
We had the President of India visiting Fiji in 2024, and then we had our external minister visiting Fiji, and other ministers visiting Fiji as well. Our prime ministers visit, Fiji's prime ministers visit to India, signing some 5 MOUs and 18 deliverables. India agreeing to build a super specialty hospital in Fiji. All these engagements has brought an awareness amongst the Indo-Fijian community in Fiji and in general with the citizens of Fiji that India can play a very important role for Fiji and in Fiji. And I think the ties are getting very stronger day by day. By the day, and we are proactively engaging in other areas as well, like cultural areas. We have health sector, we're also looking at agricultural sector, which Fiji is a tropical country, 12 months tropical weather, and agriculture is we have the right environment, natural weather patterns for investment in agriculture. So that's another area that Fiji is relying or looking at India for assistance. I think Fiji's diaspora's visit to India is quite significant, although they may have gone to Australia, New Zealand, US, but they all visit on religious excursions. You will find that there are large groups of former Fiji citizens, irrespective whether they are coming from Fiji or Australia, New Zealand, US, or Canada, there are groups who will travel to India for religious excursions, visiting and touring India. I think there is this feeling of emotional attachment, one could call it, or an attachment for identity, or tracing their roots to their ancestors' birthplaces. I mean, like, for instance, my father was born in Visakhapatnam, so I am tracing the roots of my father in Visakhapatnam, So likewise, a lot of people who travel to India are all inquiring and wanting to find the roots. So there is a very deep seated, very deep connection between ancestors of the Gilmitis and India. I think that will remain and get stronger and stronger by the day.
I want to just open it up to the entire panel. I'd love to hear from Ambassador Sudhir, PK, and Geeta, and particularly on this question of the points that PK raised in terms of transaction ease, the challenges of regulatory compliance, the ease of business, conducting business for the diaspora in India. How do we motivate the new generation and the youth to get more involved? Ambassador Sudhir brought up India Philanthropic Alliance, which I'm on the steering committee for. One of the things that we are doing at the IPA is getting the youth of the second generation or the third generation more involved in engaging with India from not just philanthropy, but from a cultural engagement perspective as well. Would love to hear each of your thoughts on your perception of why the youth is so critical in terms of continuing this bandwagon of remittances and beyond remittances, cultural and industrial engagement. Would we start with Ambassador Sudhir?
Yeah, so I made the point, and PK also made the point about an aging cohort. I think
Yes.
this is something which we need to be conscious about, because things have changed over generations. But I would say that it's a two-way street. Both the government of India will have to step up its game, because things are changing. At the same time, the youth, the young cohort, also might find more reasons how to connect with India, not just in terms of investments, not just in terms of emotional attachment, but some things which High Commissioner Sami also mentioned, tracing roots for curiosity, because see, youngsters also add a lot of value to their roots. Roots are roots, and end of the day. So I think there has to be some more facilitation on part of Government of India on how we can really cement those things. Government of India has taken initiative, but I think they are not enough. This Pravasi Bharati Saman Award, for instance, is just too little. Once in 2 years, it does not really attract or really reach out to the young minds.
Right.
And one thing I saw during my days in UAE was that the commitment, in a positive way, the commitment of the elder generation towards India was rooted very differently as compared to the commitment of the younger generation. So government will also have to sort of rework its plans. Just two more couple of these small points. I just saw the questions. One was question from Rohini about whether the remittances will go up because of the conflict. I don't see why they should go up because of the conflict. Although, of course, for the government, remittances are very, very important, particularly in today's times when crude prices have gone up and our current account deficit is really yawning. So it'll be good, but I don't see it likely, because I can also sense some kind of job loss, because tourism is one sector which has been very heavily hit, particularly in the UAE. if jobs are hit, or if salaries become stagnant, then obviously remittances, difficult for them to go up. Another question from Akshat, who was because of the conflict, should businesses hold and see, or retract, or expand? PK will, of course, throw more light because he has been in the UAE for decades. But UAE has this uncanny ability to bounce back. Whether
Yes.
COVID or the financial crisis, it can always bounce back. Of course, some things, because of this, the current conflict, are irreversible in terms of that reputation for being an oasis of stability, stable political environment, economic environment. Those things would have certainly taken some hit somewhere, but UAE always has the ability to bounce back. So I think it will be good to hold and see, but not to retract from the UAE. I mean, that's my advice.
PK, do you have any thoughts to add?
Well, I would say that, the relationship with the diaspora and the relationship with the remittance of diaspora for the government is a constant and a full-time job. They need to make sure it's not something, and we cannot just depend on emotion, or for that matter, emotional bond with the country. For various reasons, there'll be options that the diaspora will have, and we need to make sure that India remains that option. And for that, all the things that we talked about have to be something which have to be deliberately worked on. I think there should be a deliberate action towards making sure that we keep that in mind. Finally, remember, investment and returns are unemotional, in the sense they should be unemotional. They're a different bucket. And they are the things that will, kickstart it. I think that is something which is exceptionally important. Also, when we talk about, diaspora, the cohort aging, we also need to make sure that we can actually make the cohort, renew the cohort, means add more people who go abroad. Instead of trying to restrict, the movement of money, like to stay only in India, we should allow Indian companies to actually look at the world as an investment space also. They should actually look at it from a point of view of growth globally, not just growth in India. And I think that hyphenation is what is holding us back. We should just unshackle it.
And what are your thoughts, PK, in terms of deepening inspiration, engagement amongst the youth in UAE? I have a lot of friends who obviously have kids who've, studied their high school years abroad and now are going to the US for college. How do you keep that rootedness and that connectedness back to India in the context of the UAE?
Well, I think we will have to kind of connect with those people directly. Means India will have to connect with the younger generation too, not through the parents. Today, it's absolutely rooted only through parents. If we build a bridge with the diaspora kids, which is direct from them, we should build relationships and things. We don't have any process per se where the kids themselves connect there. They don't go to summer camps in India. Why don't we have emotional summer camps? Why don't we have reasons for them to come and only be tied to India through the eyes and relationships of parents?
Right.
That's unfortunate. I see that with my own kids. That relationship actually slowly, and it tapers off pretty quickly. And it's very difficult to build that again. The third generation will probably not have it. So we have to make sure that we do that. And we need to get beyond. Remember, kids of today do not see the same bonds as us. They didn't grow up there.
Sure.
Food is getting less and less. Our kids are far more global citizens in terms of food. Our kids are far more global citizens in terms of like wearing ethnic dresses and dancing at Diwali and Holi in the new place once a year. I think it needs to go deeper. We need to build deliberate attempts of that connection, and that's how we'll be able to keep the younger generations with us.
That's very well said. Thank you, PK. Geeta, would love to hear your thoughts.
Look, I think PK has covered it really well. Just to build on those deliberate connections, a couple of areas that they're already there. we just have to harness it and really focus on it. And that's just not, it's not limited to the Indian community. In fact, yoga, pranayam, Sanskrit, these are really sought after by global communities at large. And that's a real solid connection. And I know it's being used and built on, but start them young. And these things matter. And because it is something that is taught in some schools, and it is, I think India in general, especially now with the International Yoga Day, have done a good job, but there's more to be done in terms of then being proud of something with your Indian roots that the whole world really understands and accepts and adopts. And I think that it grows from there, but this is something they need to connect with and be proud of. So I would think, I know it's probably an airy-fairy one, but I've seen real results in young children, that they say how or the simple thing, they can pronounce an asan's name rather than calling it an anglicized name. So there's these little things, but they matter in the connection that I think surpasses and transcends cultures that India has. It's proudly Indian.
Ambassador Sudhir, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think we have had a very rich discussion, covered a lot of things. Remittance was just the beginning of the discussion.
Yes, exactly. I just want to thank each of you for this incredibly engaged conversation. I think a couple of the takeaways that we have is that there needs to be a two-way street between India, the Indian government, and the diaspora. The government needs to step up beyond just biannual conferences and the challenges of transaction ease, the ease of doing business, the challenges of things like FCRA approvals, the facilitation of the government of India in its engagement with diasporic nations is something that needs to be of a greater priority and focused in order for investments to broaden and for more of the youth to want to invest and engage in India. Beyond remittances, looking at the youth of today, the opportunity to engage is really about that co-facilitation, as PK mentioned. I thought that was a really profound point of giving our youth the reason to want to engage with India and to hold on to Indian culture, Indian rituals, cultural festivals, religious festivals, whatever they may be. But it has to be a give and take. And I think that's a very powerful point, which we have addressed in the Indiaspora report as well, the need for the Indian government to deepen its engagement in terms of easing obstacles and barriers to entry. So I want to thank all of you for being with us. It's been a very rich discussion, as Ambassador Sudhir said, and thank you, High Commissioner. Thank you, PK. Thank you, Geeta, and thank you, Ambassador Sudhir.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.